when you're introduced, if you call somebody by the wrong name, like Kevin invited me to come speak today, and he was late getting here, and I was a little nervous that he wasn't going to come, because I've actually had people invite me to speak before and then not show up. It is a little awkward. I had a lady introduce me in Gunnersville, Alabama one time. She said, Jim's a great speaker, he's dynamic, he's encouraging, he knows his topic, you'll have a lot of fun with him, I gotta go. And so she did leave, and it felt very awkward. And in that same meeting, you know, I came around and I tried to meet with all you guys and try to get to know some of you. Guys like Chris and Jim and Jimmy and some of you guys that Joe we met. Oh, wait a minute, where's Joe? There's Joe right there. And Hank, I met you before we got started here, and I try to meet people. So I was standing in the back of this room in Gunnersville, Alabama, speaking to the Chamber of Commerce's annual breakfast. And this little old lady stood up next to me. See, I'm looking at you, Christy. I want to make sure I'm looking for the smiles. She stood up next to me and she goes, "Who's the speaker today?" And I said, "I really don't know, ma'am." And she goes, "I hope he's funny." And I said, "I do too." She said, "Reckon he'll finish on time?" "Yes, ma'am, I know he will finish on time." So if nothing else, as project managers, you know about resources, you know about timelines, you know about milestones, and I'll be finished in an hour and a half or 2 hours easily when I get prompted back in time. So if you can't tell, my wife says I'm a speech in search of an audience. And I like to get in front of groups of people because, frankly, it's the only time I get eye contact after raising 2 children that doesn't have that glare and that roll thing that goes with it. I started this when that young man back there behind the camera and his sister were in their early teens. I started it because I needed a place to get away from time to time and not have to deal with things that were my ordinary business. I was invited to go speak by a good friend of mine, Dr. Ann Penny, to come speak to her leadership group. She wanted me to come and talk, share a few words of wisdom. And I said, "Well, what do you want me to talk about?" She said, "Well, I don't really care. Whatever you want to talk about, you pick a topic." I said, "As long as it's not about money and banking, I'll be happy." Right? I just don't want to talk about money. I don't want to talk about boring. I do it all day long. Church, will you be on the finance committee? No, please, don't want to do that. But you can talk about anything you want to. So over the next couple of weeks, Dr. Penny and I worked out something called coaching as a model for leadership. That's what I would talk about. It's the first time I'd ever spoken. And we talked a couple times a week throughout the course of getting ready for that. And after a few weeks of Dr. Penny coming to see me and talking to me on the phone, actually, I'd go see her and she talked to me on the telephone. My secretary, a little girl named Beth, who's about 5 feet tall, came in my office. And she said, "Mr. Owens, I'm worried about you." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, I know you're going to see Dr. Penny a lot. And I know she's the head of the East Alabama Mental Health Department." And I said, "Beth, I'm taking my medicine. Everything will be fine." And so you have interesting experiences. And I do know that my job for the next 20 or 30 minutes is to talk, and yours is to listen. The danger is you get done before I do. And if you do get done, Jackie, I'm watching you too, I want to encourage you to just gently put your head down, get a little nap, do whatever you need to do to get a little rest, and I won't take offense. I do get to talk about something today that I'm pretty passionate about. And apparently I was billed as the title of my book, which is 40 Lessons in Leadership. I'm going to talk about a subset of that book, which has to do with trust. Trust is a model for teamwork and for leadership. And you guys are project managers, and I would suggest to you that you're really not project managers. You really are resource managers, you're people managers. Yeah, a project is kind of a nebulous thing that comes out to a product or a service or a piece of software. But really and truly, there's people in the middle of all this. And so we want to talk about what trust means in those relationships that you have, rather than simply managing a process or allocation of resources. Because people who distribute resources are oftentimes questioned as what their motives are. And people who keep up with milestones. By the way, I'm told that a project manager is someone who is responsible for delivering something on time, under budget, as planned, or able to write a report that reflects the same whether it happens or not. Does that happen? I'm also told that a project manager, well, the description is this. The optimist says the glass is half full, the pessimist says it's half empty, and the project manager says it's too big a glass. Is that all right? No? Okay. We'll strike that one from the next conversation with project managers, I can assure you that. But I want to talk to you about trust as a foundation for leadership and teamwork. You do have milestones to keep up with. You do have resources to allocate. You do have information to process and reports to write. But at the end of every one of those issues is a person that you're dealing with. Somebody with a range of emotions, with experiences, with biases, with fears, and we forget about that. And so the premise today that I want to give you is that every relationship you have is an end. It's not a means. It's an end in and of itself. Because the quality of your relationships will dictate, oftentimes, how much relationship capital you build and how much you're able to accomplish in a given period of time with a group of people, and how you motivate them to respond to get to results. Most of us as an organization will focus on results and accountability before we'll focus on trust and other things that are foundational for that. So I want to challenge you to begin to think about things a little differently and tip upside down, if you will, a pyramid on which today you have trust maybe at the top or maybe not even on it, but at the bottom you'll have results and accountability. And I want you to put that at the top of the pyramid rather than at the bottom of it, because I want you to focus on causes, not symptoms. Results are an outcome. They're a symptom of something, right? They're the outcome that came from something before it. So that's what we want to talk about here as we move forward. Now, people who know about trust think about, well, let me get a definition. Joe, what's a definition of trust? That's a good question. I'm great at questions.
I think trust it's a point where you're not really thinking about whether or not you believe in somebody or not. It's just a given.
It's just a given. Okay. All right. What goes into that giving? Jimmy, you want to help with this question? What goes into trust for you?
Well, I think
not being called on in front of a group, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's the respect and loyalty you build in that relationship. That you build trust. I think it's just kind of something, I guess, that builds over time. I guess is what it is. You have to prove or earn it, I guess, more or less within a relationship.
Okay, great. Any other comments about what trust is? You have a comment about to raise your hand, or you just working your shoulder out?
Both.
Both?
I'll just throw something out there. You have, I guess, a couple of kinds of knowledge, and this is just me hanging around with a couple of lawyers and Chick-fil-A line a little while ago. But there's a priori. Okay? And whatever the other one is. And so, when you feel and assume that things are going to work the way they're expected to work, without seeing a lot of people in a long period of time, there's trust. So, I guess the post of that is if things move along for a while and they work as they should, then that's assurance. So, in the world of trust, you have assurance and then you have a priori expectation. And I guess from a soft perspective, you could say trust is a priori expectation, so that we don't necessarily need the assurance. But the assurance, as you work in banking, you understand, if your people know how to, for instance, look at a ATM machine and audit it, like the RT auditors do,
Right.
that still doesn't change the fact that they have to go to a class out of town every 2 years to retake training, because you have to do due diligence and the other people. But it's been before.
And I think you're right. There's some foundational things that come into trust, that there are assumptions that go into it. But quite frankly, I'm from so far out in the country that we hunt towards town. So when we get to Latin and things like a priori and other things, I have to find some simpler ways to explain it for myself, because I'm an Auburn fan. I was teasing our Alabama guy here earlier about, what's your name again? Scott. I'm actually like somebody over here at this other table told me they didn't care anything about who won the Alabama or Auburn game. They were the only person in Alabama that didn't care about football. I care about football, but I didn't go to either one of the schools. And so I am a chameleon when it comes to, and like I said earlier, I'm not running for office, but I might someday. So, but I think trust is this. It's like a cocktail or a casserole. right? When a bunch of different ingredients go in to create something completely different, and something that tastes really good, whether it's a Manhattan or an Appletini, I don't know, Kristen, you may be Appletini, I don't know, is that you? And so, cheers, right? But it includes these things. It includes honesty, it includes fairness, it includes predictability, and it includes reliability. If it doesn't have those four components, I would suggest to you, you can't really have trust. You can't really have a kind of arrangement in relationships. If I can't rely on Jackie to do something that she says she's going to do, or if I can't rely on what she's told me, then we're going to have trust issues. If I can't get an honest answer from Elena about something, then I have to wonder what her motivations are. So I have to have candor, what one author calls the brutal facts. Not politic, not saying things meanly and angrily. You know, how many of you men are here are married? How many of you are married? How many of you ever faced this question? Does this make me look fat? We do not want to answer that question. We don't want to be asked it, right?
Yes.
And we certainly don't want to, answer it wrong. So we stare at our wives' eyes and go, what am I supposed to say? Because we want to love our wives and care for them and say things nice to them. But we want to speak the truth in love, which is one of the scriptural verses that I would say to men, keep that in mind if your wife asks you that question, because she's liable to tell you you're losing your hair and, you're getting a little white around the belt as well, and, and you're not the guy I married. You're not the captain of the football team anymore. But you have to have these things to really have trust. You have to have honesty. You have to have reliability. You have to have honesty, integrity, whatever you want to call it, and predictability. Because if you don't, here's what happens. If that's the bottom of the foundation, and that's what trust is, and you don't have that, you can't deal with conflict. You can't deal with conflict well if you don't have an environment in which people can speak honestly and candidly, in which ideas get debated, not personalities. How often in life do you have conflict with somebody simply because they're different than you, right? I'm an outgoing, bottom line guy. And if I get around somebody who's hyper-analytical, I drive them crazy. Because I just want the answer. I want to know the bottom line. Don't give me the formula, give me the answer. And if I'm at a party and I work the crowd, I like moving around. But there are other people who want to be in a kind of a quiet environment. They're overwhelmed by people like me. So if my personality, behavior gets in the way, if we don't have trust, we can't deal with conflict. And we can't separate project conflict or process conflict from interpersonal conflict, from just being different, from being an Alabama guy or being an Auburn guy, or a Notre Dame guy. One Notre Dame guy, whole group. Anybody remember a guy named Eric Parsegian? I still root against him. I did grow up in Alabama, just so you know. I was raised, and my parents thought I was turned at one point because I married a girl from Auburn. But they forgive me as far as I know. By the way, I told my dad the other day, this is funny, I told my dad I was speaking to a group of PMPs. And I wrote him an email. Well, autocorrect. I'm speaking to a group of pimps. And, so I get a note back from my dad that says, you still going to church? And if you are paying attention? And I sent a note back and I said, no, project management professionals. Okay, I feel better. And he felt a lot better after that. But it's autocorrect is not always good. So you can't deal with conflict if you don't have trust. And if you don't have the ability to deal with conflict, then you really can't get commitment. Right? How many of you would like people 100% wholly committed to every project you ever manage? And how many of you believe that everybody is really committed 100% to every project you manage? Do you believe that? Show of hands. They're all 100%? No. There's competing agendas, competing resources, competing personalities, and commitment is limited. But if they were all committed, now this is the thing I love about Dick Saban. He talks about doing everything right over and over and over again, every play, every down, work the process. That's commitment. And if you can get 18 to 21-year-old men to do that, you're doing something right. And I don't care how much they're paying him down there, he's worth every penny out of it more. Because he's figured it out. And somehow people trust him. I don't mean that as a slam. I say they trust his instincts. They trust his process. They know that if you'll follow what he shows them, that it'll work. So if you can't deal with conflict, you can't really get to a level of commitment that's important to be successful. And if you can't get there, you can't get to accountability. And that's where most of us as organizations spend all our time. Who's going to send me a report when I left an organization at one point in my career where I spent more time writing reports than I did taking care of clients, which drove me nuts. The mission became reporting about the mission rather than accomplishing the mission. How many of you have ever been in that boat before? Right? Welcome to America. And it's because, why? There's no trust. You have to have more rules when you have less trust. If you don't have rules, if you have trust, you don't have to worry as much about the rules. Mike Krzyzewski, who's the winningest basketball coach in basketball history in the NCAA, has one rule for his Duke University basketball players. That rule is don't embarrass Duke University. That's it. There's no curfew. There's no don't dress this way. There's don't do. He trusts them. And can anybody ever remember, other than the lacrosse team, which was almost a scandal and then wasn't a scandal, or maybe it still is a scandal, but Duke University's basketball team, as far as I know, has never had a scandal. And Mike Krzyzewski's never had a scandal because he's trusted people and he's imbued them with the responsibility to be committed to the program in a manner that leads for personal accountability. And if you have two people in a relationship holding one another accountable instead of the boss or the project manager holding them accountable, then you're going to have a far more effective environment. And you're going to have a far more fun environment. And I'm all about fun. I like to have fun. I take my job very seriously. I don't take me very seriously. You know, but commitment is essential. And here's a story I think that really illustrates commitment. I have a now deceased uncle. Was one of the apples. He was just one of my favorite guys. My two uncles were both my favorite uncles. But he got sick at one point. He went to the doctor with my Aunt Faye. This was long before he passed away. And he went to the doctor, and he had an exam with Faye there, and she said, the doctor finished the exam, and he called Faye aside and said, Luke, get dressed, and I'll talk to your wife. The doctor said, you know, Faye, your husband's very sick, but I think we can save him. I think we can help him. And she said, well, what do we got to do? I'll do anything. And he said, well, he's got to have 3 balanced meals, home-cooked meals, great food, you know, vitamins, minerals, the whole thing. You got to cook for him 3 times a day. She said, I'll do it. So what else? Second thing, no work around the house. No dishes, no laundry, no grass cutting, no nothing. Nothing. Can't do any of that. I got it. I'll do that. I'll take care of it. Anything to say. I'm committed. Luke's buttoned up his pants, about to come over there. Doctor's talking to Faye and says, there's one more thing. She says, what is it? He said, you have to have intimate marital relations with your husband every night. Every night, and every time he feels the need, you have to have that. And Luke walks up about that time and says, baby, give it to me straight. What did the doctor say? And she looked at him and said, he says you're not going to make it. She was only committed to a point, right? So the results became in question. If we have fully committed people to a mission who trust one another, then in fact, I believe our results are going to be far better. We're going to have a lot more fun going along. Things are going to work out better for us in the long haul. And this strategy, let's talk just a little bit about, yeah, I'm okay. I've only got another hour and 20 minutes to get, so we're good. This strategy, let's talk about what's going on in the world today right now. How do you feel about Congress, Emma? Do you believe in Congress? Do you trust Congress?
No.
No? Why?
They're politicians.
They're politicians. It's like they can't sit out and over, right? Just like the speaker. So what about your congressman? Do you trust your congressman?
To a point.
To a point. How about the rest of them? How do you feel about Congress? Kevin? Well, maybe I shouldn't ask you, but I will. Go ahead. How do you feel about Congress?
Well, you talk about results. It's tough to see results right now.
Okay. It's tough to see results.
Words and actions don't line up.
Do you trust them?
No.
Okay. How about your congressman, Eddie? Your congressman.
I trust him, but
Do you?
he's one of 400 plus.
Yes. So what's interesting is when you study the history of congressional approval over the last 50 years, you find 50 years ago people didn't trust Congress a lot. They trusted Congress a lot more in general. But they trusted their congressman eminently. They could trust him with anything, or her with anything. Now, that relationship has shrunk to almost even. Not only do we not trust Congress, we don't trust our congressman. We're like, throw all the bums out. Right? So we want to get rid of the financial services industry. When I started in it, was considered kind of like being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. You just kind of have an apprenticeship. But this little thing called the recession, the Great Recession in 2007 and 8 and 9, has put financial services companies on their heels in terms of trust. There was no transparency in much of what they did, and so everyone's been colored with the same brush, both investment bankers and commercial bankers. But there's a trust issue there. And so there are people like Google, and people like Microsoft, and people like PayPal, which I guess is part of Google now, or one of them. But they're all trying to get into what has historically been the brick and mortar pillars and marble financial institution stuff, which is just not worth a hoot anymore in terms of what people think about. And really, believe it or not, business, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is a great site you ought to go to. Edelman has this organization that deals with trust across the world and across different industries. And he says that roughly 20% of global population thinks business is best equipped to solve the world's problems. And less than 15% think government is. Now, the indictment is that nobody's considered trustworthy. It's gotten better over the last several years. But each of us has a role to play in that. And so that's what I want to challenge you with as we get done here today. I want to challenge you to think a little bit about your own personal responsibility as it relates to trust. What do we do about it? What do we do with what's going on in outside of St. Louis right now? The police don't trust each other, probably. The citizens don't trust the police. And there's probably a very good reason for that. Some of that's related to things that have nothing to do with fact, but it's rooted in fact. And perception is where trust falls, is where trust is really hinged. It's that experience part. So what I want to challenge you with is to look in the mirror and think a little bit about this. Here's a story I think that illustrates the need to look in the mirror. There were three lifelong friends, a Baptist, a Methodist, and a Presbyterian minister. And they and their wives all went on a vacation together. They wanted to go together and spend some time together and just enjoy a couple of weeks. And they were all, unfortunately, killed in a tragic car accident. And they were all at St. Peter's Gate in heaven together. And St. Peter was asking each one of them, why should we let you into heaven? And so he asked the Methodist minister, tell me why. He said, well, I've been a missionary in Africa. I've taken care of poor, starving widows and orphans. I preached the gospel all my life. St. Peter says, that's true, but you love money so much, you married a woman named Peggy. You have to go to heaven. So he gets to the Baptist minister, and he says, tell me why we should let you into heaven. And he says, well, I preached the gospel. I've been in Africa for 15 years as a missionary. I've started countless organizations in Eastern Europe. I've done all these different things to take care of widows and orphans. And he goes, that's true. But you loved wine so much, you married a woman named Sherry. And the Presbyterian, and he said, and you can't come into heaven, you got to go to heaven. And the Presbyterian minister looked at his wife and said, come on, Fanny, we'll never get this It's about as dirty as it gets with me. I think we all have to be able to poke fun at ourselves. So if you don't like the joke, if you're Presbyterian or Baptist or whatever, just turn it around and tell it on on somebody else. But really and truly, this what has to happen. This was the issue that this minister may need to look in the mirror, right? He needed to examine himself. What we all have to do, really, to deal with trust and build as a foundation in our organizations, is to look in the mirror and decide what we're going to do. Do some self-analysis. Ask your peers, do a 360-degree assessment. You may find out that, maybe I'm not quite as trustworthy as I perceive myself. Maybe the way I lead is a little different than I expected. Maybe people perceive me in a little different, abrasive manner in ways that I didn't mean to. I'm always surprised that I'm intimidating people, even though I'm 6'7", 245, 6'6", really, after shrinking. By the way, Cam Newton, when he won the Heisman Trophy, 6'6", 245. You're looking at Cam there, right? You were taking pictures. You want to see me do the Heisman? There's a chapter in my book on doing the Heisman, which is about how not to do the Heisman if you're going to avoid responsibility. That's not something you want to do. But you have this chance to plant a seed with people around you and in your relationships, and to reflect back what it is that you really want to get. You know the golden rule, right? It's do unto others before they do unto you. It's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You want to be treated that way. So you have the chance to really start there. And you can start in your organizations by doing some self-assessment. Just getting people around the water cooler and talking about it. Not moping about it, not moaning about it, because what normally happens is we talk about those people, right? Those people upstairs, on the other floor, in D.C., in what, somewhere, it's never us. Michael Jackson, I guess, had it right. I look at the man in the mirror. And it's not always a pleasant thing. In fact, the older I get, the closer I get to the mirror, the worse it looks. But that's where all the blemishes are. And if I don't get close enough, I can't really tell. I don't really know. So ask somebody who you trust, to speak the truth in love to you and help you change your organization. Now, there are speakers who do not know when to quit. They don't know how to stop. They really struggle with the ending. They look wistfully into the sunset, hoping something will help them know what to say, so that they can stop, so they will know where the period and the exclamation point belong. Until people start to look at them vacant and wonder, is he ever going to stop? And the answer is yes, because I'm not that kind of speaker. Thank you for your time. Get on.